All righty, let's see. Welcome back. In just a minute, we're about to start with our second session with Dr. Gamble. Dr. Gamble, you should be able to share.
Thank you, Patricia. So first, but before I start sharing my PowerPoint, I want to introduce myself. I am Keith Gamble. I'm a professor of finance and economics at Middle Tennessee State University. I'm delighted to be here as part of this project. I grew up in a rural community just to the south in Alabama, and it's exciting to see this opportunity for rural communities to get these essential facilities. So I'm very happy to be part of this effort in helping you through this application process. And I welcome those watching by video. We're glad you're taking that step to help you on this process. So let me share my screen. So this is a community facilities grant and loan program. And what I'm going to do is just focus on the financial part of the process, which I think can be a harder part of the process. As Dr. Livingston said, a lot of the application is very straightforward, looking at the instructions, following along with the checklist, and the instructions is very clear. Some of the financial stuff I think will be clear, but especially if you're less familiar with the process of applying for a federal grant and loan program like this, maybe if some of the terms or the approaches aren't familiar. So I'll be talking about those things with you here. So let's start with the kinds of funding available as part of this program. So there are low interest direct loans. So in being a loan, that means money that you are expected to pay back in time. Now, it's low interest financing that's being provided. That's the best kind of financing. And when you're searching for loans for a project, you always want to look for the lowest possible interest rate. That will mean the least cost for you over time on the project. Now, the loans part that are provided in this program are what are called direct loans. So what that means is the funding agency, the USDA in this case, is providing you, the entity applying for the funding, the money directly without any involvement of a third party. So these are direct loans from the USDA to you, the eligible applicant. Now, I think even better than a low interest loan is the opportunity to get grant money. Now, I'm a college professor, and that's something that our students understand very well, right? Like, student loans can help you get through college, but if you can be eligible for grant money, I think that's the ideal for anyone asking for funds, because grant money is money that is gifted to you that you're not expected to pay back. So grant money is very powerful in making an impact. And there are grant funds available as part of this application process. There's some details about how much can be given in grants depending on the size and the income level. And I'll get into those details very shortly. But I think that's a big picture idea that's very important to understand. The loan money has to be paid back, albeit at a low interest rate. And the grant money is money that doesn't have to be paid back. It's paid, and that's the end of the grant money. Grant money does not have to be paid back by the entity. And then there can be a combination of the two. It's not just either or. It's not just a loan or a grant. There's actually primarily mixing of these two funding sources. And I'll show you those parameters in a minute. And I also want to mention that we're not going into the great detail here, but there is a related USDA program that's a loan guarantee program. So that loan guarantee program that's done by the USDA, that is not a direct loan. So a direct loan is money that comes straight from the funding agency to the requester of the funding. The loan guarantee program happens through commercial lenders. So If that's something that interests you in the future, know that option does exist. And the source of information about the loan guarantee program is through the lender. And as we'll see, and Dr. Livingston mentioned with that letter example he showed, right, the purpose of this funding is not to do away with commercial lending. USDA has this loan guarantee program that's supporting commercial lending. And then this is an alternative for communities that wouldn't otherwise get such a low interest opportunity. That's the program that we'll focus on today, but I did want to mention that related loan guarantee program that's coordinated through the lenders. Okay, so those are the different kinds of funding available. So for grant money, that money that doesn't have to be paid back, first there has to be funds available, and that can change over time. As Dr. Livingston mentioned, the funding is made available over the government's fiscal year, which starts in October. So a little tip, yes, you can apply for this funding at any point in time during the year, but maybe to make sure that there's funding available, I think an ideal time is coming up on the calendar, and that's right after the October 1st start of a new fiscal year. But I think the fact that we're having this workshop is a great sign that money is available, right? Like if there weren't money available in this program, we wouldn't be going to all this effort to help you in the process. We're doing this because money is available to you, and we want to help you get that money. We especially want to help you get grant money where available. Now, there are some provisions that are all written down and set for how much can be given in that precious grant money. And so the provision is done by size of the community and the median household income. But I think importantly, that median household income is not just the median household income for the whole state. It focuses on the state rural communities median household income. Okay, so these are the provisions set in the program. Grant funding is a maximum of 75%, which is quite a large amount. If the community is 5,000 or less than 5,000 in size, and the median household income of that community is less than the higher of the federal poverty line, or the 60% of the state rural median household income. Just to give you an idea, I did look up a recent number of the state's non-metropolitan median household income. This is a recent number, though possibly not the latest. I know the US Census Bureau just released a lot of new information, but a recent number I have to give you a ballpark was 43,780 as the state's rural median household income. So then if you take 60% of that as a ballpark number of $26,268, that would be a fairly recent state rural level. So if you're less than that, then you're eligible for the maximum 75% grant funding, which is the best kind of funding because you don't have to pay it back. And then for each 10,000, for each 10% that you add to the state rural median household income, of my recent figure, that ballpark is about $4,378 of additional income. I think with this and a lot of the features, as Dr. Livingston mentioned, I wouldn't sweat the details too much because there are people here to help you with those details in the Rural Development Office, right? So if you want to be sure that you have the latest numbers of what the rural median income level is, that's your best source for all of this information. But this level should give you some idea of what's reasonable for your community, what's possible for the provision of grant funding versus loans. So the other percentage is money that's available through loans. So this is a combination of loans and grants that are possible. Okay, so I want to say again the importance of that checklist. Okay, the USDA has made that checklist to try to make it as easy as possible for the applicant to know that they have completed what they need to in that process. So I encourage you to work down the checklist. So in preparing this focused talk on the financials, what I did is I went through that checklist myself, and I picked out all the items that had a financial component so that I could focus on that financial component. And this is the list of the items in the checklist that have a financial component, even though it may be small, or it may be most of the whole item. So then I'll run through this list one by one, looking at the financial item and giving you some guidance to help you provide that information. So again, the importance of the checklist, doing it step by step. Also, there are instructions that come with the checklist and with each document. And the instructions, I think, are the first place to go and looking for guidance is how to complete that document. You have this video. You also have the Rural Development Office. And I've applied to lots of grants in my life as a researcher. I've been fortunate enough to get some grant opportunities, some provided by the federal government. I don't think I've ever had a successful grant application where I didn't talk to a coordinator in the office about some of the details in that grant. So don't let like some uncertainty about an aspect of the financials that are required from you, don't let that stop you from applying, right? It's normal, it's expected to have some questions and need a little help. So I'm glad you're as part of this process here, but I also encourage you to reach out to the best source, that Rural Development Office. They're there to help you with this process, just as we are as well. So going in order of the financial items that appear on the checklist in that standard form SF 424, there are two initial financial items. There's an estimated funding box, box 18, where you provide estimated funding. Notice it's estimated, so you're making a reasonable guess about what you could expect in this project from the various sources of possible funding for a project, which might include federal funding. It might be money that's provided by the applicant to make the project work, other state monies or local monies, anything else uncategorized. That always is what the other box is. Therefore, any income produced by the program. Also note, some of these might be zero, right? Just because you have a box on an application that's asking for a number doesn't mean you have to put a positive number there, right? You might just have zero. And if there's no state funding part of this project, put a zero and show that just because there's a box there doesn't mean you have to put a large or a positive number in it. You just want to show everything. Be very transparent, be very honest through the process. So item 20 on this form, ask if you're delinquent on federal debt. So if so, be sure to say that, and then they ask for an explanation. Be sure to be honest and transparent about that. Now, I would be, if I were an entity that was delinquent on federal debt, I sure hope I have a good explanation. And notice that they do ask you here. They don't even just tell you, go away. They want to know more in the process. So be sure to be honest and provide what's needed on the application. Okay, so then moving on to budget and assurances. Now here we split up in the documents that are needed. There's the standard form SF 484A, and this is for non-construction programs. And if you have a really heavy construction project, like Dr. Livingston gave us the example of the school, that sounds like a heavy construction project to me, then you go off to SF 484C for the construction programs. There's also a project budget in the project narrative, which is a written guidance of what the project is all about. So let's take a look at these. So for the non-construction programs, one thing to note about this is non-construction programs document actually has an item on it for construction. So that's a real signal that, you know, it's not that your project can't have a small part of construction in it, right? A small minor part of construction that can still be a non-construction program. But if construction is the major part of the project, you need to be on the 484C, which we'll get to. So for non-construction programs are primarily not construction programs. We have this section A, which is a budget summary, which asks for function or activity. There's also this catalog of federal domestic assistance number. So this is something that can be looked up. And also in the instructions, there's some specific information here about what that number looks like. So I learned the USDA funding, it starts with a 10, and then there's a decimal point, and then there's 3 digits. This is the kind of thing the Rural Development Office can be very helpful for, because they deal with this kind of thing each day. There's also estimated unobligated funds, and then a new or revised budget, right? I think most applicants are probably going to be doing new budgets for new projects. So maybe you have a follow-on budget that's changing from something that was already applied previously. It's a potential for a revised budget, but I think it's going to be new for most applicants. Section B, here's our budget categories. You want a specific breakdown of the budget into these various categories. So personnel, you're talking about people and paying people involved in the project. Fringe benefits. Fringe benefits can be lots of things. So like a working meal is something that is a fringe benefit that's paid. Travel is part of the project, equipment, supplies, contractual, and then G, notice construction is a line item here in the non-construction program document, right? So if it's construction is a small part, a minor part that you don't have to go through the 484C and all the additional requirements for major construction projects, that would minor construction would go in here and in line G. Also other, which is any of the budget that doesn't fall naturally in one of these categories, that goes to other. Direct charges are immediate and necessary to the project. Indirect charges are important charges that are related to the project, but not necessarily immediate. So just a made-up example is like if you're you're funding a basketball game, paying for the referees, right? Like that's a direct cost, because you can't have a basketball game without the referees involved. But maybe the security officers outside, that would be an indirect cost, because you can still have the basketball game, but the security officers are really important to it, right? So those would be indirect. That's just a made-up example of you get an idea. Now, if you're not sure about any of these, and if you're not quite sure what should be equipment versus supplies, it's a great question for your rural development officer. And I would encourage you to make sure you're transparent and show everything, right? Like maybe you put a number that's in other that you learn later really should have been in one of the categories. Just make sure you don't leave anything out in filling out this information. Don't be afraid to get help and ask questions. All right, so section C, we're specifically on non-federal resources that are going to support the budget of this project. Section D, forecasted cash needs. And those forecasted cash needs, they're asking for the total of the first year and by quarter needs separated into federal and non-federal. Section E are budget estimates of federal funds needed for the balance of the project. remember, just because there's a line doesn't mean that you have to fill something in it, right? Like you have to have one of the lines done, but maybe that can capture everything. You don't have to put something in, say, line 19, which is the fourth one, if there's just no fourth one in your project. But make sure that you're clear and transparent about everything that's involved, and that other category is there to make sure that you capture everything. All right, so let's now move. This is if you have a project that's primarily construction, you don't go to the 484A and then the related B document. Here you are at a primary construction project. There's some additional things that are needed for you, and this is standard form 484C and the related 484D that you go to. Okay, so here a lot of the same type things, but some specific stuff related to major construction projects on here. One thing to note now, column A is looking for total cost of these items. We also have column B, which are costs not allowable for participation. And then column C is going to subtract those out. So column A minus column B to get you the total allowable cost in these different areas. So now we're talking about major construction projects. Is some things here, items we're going to see you wouldn't see other places, like site work, demolition and removal. These are specific to major construction. Again, you put everything in the category that makes the most natural sense. Some are more capturing, I think, than others, because like I might think of construction, which is item 9, as being kind of all of this. This is for construction programs, right? So the more specific ones fill out what you can, and then the broader categories like an other or miscellaneous category, that's just things that don't fall naturally into specific categories. But be sure to show everything, be as transparent as possible, and ask the rural development office for help. So item 17 there at the bottom, federal assistance requested, calculated as follows. Consult the federal agency for federal percentage share. So that would be, they're telling you to contact the rural development office so you can get the specific federal agencies federal percentage share. So I'd follow the instructions and make that contact so that you can make sure to have the most up-to-date number in that process. Okay, so now on the project narrative, which is saying in words what the project is all about, I'm highlighting here that there is a financial component of that in doing a cost breakdown of the project. And they're specific about how they want to break down the costs within the project narrative. The categories they want to know are listed here in those Roman numerals: construction, engineering, and architectural expenses, legal, administrative, equipment, land rights, interest, and then the always other miscellaneous category, anything that doesn't naturally fit into those other categories. This is the financial component of your narrative, your description of your project. As Dr. Livingston showed you, right, this funding source is not meant to do away with all commercial sources. It's really to supplement what's possible from commercial lenders, and it's giving borrowers from these rural communities, it's giving them options they wouldn't otherwise have, or lower interest options. And they ask you to prove that. So it can be like this sample letter that Dr. Livingston showed, which is a rejection. But as he mentioned, it need not be a rejection. It could just be a simple estimate of the cost of funding your project, which is almost certainly going to be a higher interest rate than is provided by the USDA. But the purpose of this is not to eliminate commercial lending. It's really to supplement the needs of this community. The letter need not say these exact words. This is just given as examples so that you have some idea of what's expected. And then you're required to provide 5 years of audited financial statements. These statements need to be prepared by a certified public accountant, that's a CPA. So I know many applicants, they do this as a matter of course in their organization. They have these. Those are quite easy to provide if that's something that your organization regularly does. Now, otherwise, you are asked to prepare your own financial statements for the past 5 years, to include a profit and loss statement. That's also called an income statement. It talks about your revenues, any money you bring in to the organization, and any expenses, any costs of the agency within a year. That's the profit or loss statement, or also called income statement. Now, a balance sheet is something that looks at your assets and your liabilities. Assets are all the things that you own and their value. Liabilities are all the things that you owe, and the amount owed. It's a snapshot of your financial situation of the organization. And then cash flows is kind of like the income statement, but focuses specifically on cash, right? Some of the expenses can be non-cash expenses on the income statement. Just looking at cash, cash focuses alone, how the cash money is moving on your organization is what the cash flow statement is. If you are one of these organizations that doesn't have financial statements prepared, one option is to start doing that and go to a CPA, which are skilled and trained in this. And if not, you can find some templates online of what a basic organizational statement looks at to get started in that process. These statements provide really essential information. They're required of publicly traded companies, for instance, and they have to be a certain way because they do help give insights into your organization and its function. And you do have to provide a future budget. So your organization's proposed budget, what's estimated for the future. Of course, it hasn't happened. You won't know exact, but you need to provide some estimates, some plans for your future finances in the organization. There are also some financial items on the applicant feasibility report. So those are stated here, just cost estimates in these categories. The other for anything that doesn't fit naturally into categories. Item 6 on the applicant feasibility report asks specific sources of income, estimate the expected revenue for a typical year. Item 7 asks any other funds, sources, amount of funds that may be available other than the USDA. Some of this information you do put in other places on the document. You just have to kind of gather it and put it here in the applicant feasibility report. And then finally, the easiest thing that you'll do in the whole pre-application process is right there at the end of the checklist of the survey of ensuring equal opportunity. There's one financial item on that survey. And it's this question: what is the size of the applicant's annual budget? And this is the total budget for the year. So everything that your organization has in the budget, not just this project. It's just to get an idea of the size of your organization. So check the box that most fits your entity's annual budget. And then really importantly, I think this further information it's hugely important. The portal that we've created, this is materials designed to help you. These videos can be watched and rewatched, and you can pick out the parts of them that you need to hear most and then rehear. There's also the guidance book for applicants that the USDA office has produced, and that was really important for me helping prepare this talk. So there's a lot of resources to help you, and then there are people in that rural development office that are there to answer your questions. So I don't let don't let the fact that there's a lot of pages in that guidance book for applicants deter you, because there are a lot of resources and people that are interested in helping you through this process.
All righty. Thank you, Dr. Gamble. Now we will take another 10-minute break and we'll be ready to start the third session, and we will start back at 1:20.